Welcome to this webinar and welcome to the session, which we hope will be a very informative and interactive session with you all this afternoon, really focusing on economic disruption and the impact on procurement. And we've got a good mix, I think, of both some presentations, some input for you, but also we're going to open it up for some good discussion around some of the challenges and the issues that's there. So delighted that you can join us today. We hope that you really find this a useful session for you. My name is Duncan. I'm a director at Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. I'm delighted to be able to be here today. And part of what we're doing today is also focusing on a new partner which we're launching for the Swiss market, which is PS². And we'll have both Pauline and Thierry joining us to share a bit more about them and what they're doing and why they're doing this in this way with CIPS. So delighted that we can have that opportunity to talk with them today as well. What we will be doing is running through a bit of discussion. We'll have some presentation and then we'll open it up for Q&A. As we go through, if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A in the Zoom. That way we know where they are. But please also, as some of you started doing, also use chat. We always find it's really good to get discussion going. So if you want to talk, use chat. But if you've got any specific questions, please put them in Q&A. And the second half of the session, we will be spending some time on that. We are recording this as well. So as and when we finish with this, we'll be able to wrap it up and also share it more widely next week. So that'll be good for you as well. So why we're here and why is CIPS here? Well, one of the things that we're trying to do, CIPS, is we are a global institute. We try and support the profession all over the world. And while I'm sat here in the UK, we do have offices in Australia, in UAE, in South Africa, in Turkey, and also in the US. But we also work through partners where we know that we need a good focus on a specific geography. For instance, in Poland, in Sweden, in France, in Italy, we've got one in Malaysia, we have one in Ghana. And we were delighted that Thierry and Pauline wanted to come on board and help us to support driving the profession forward in Switzerland and really looking at how we work with organizations more effectively as we go forward on that. So I'll give them an opportunity in a minute just to talk about them. And then what we will do after we've had that is then we'll move on, and we've got a great presentation from Glen. He's sort of CIPS economist, and some of you have probably seen him present before. Very insightful, I think, about the impact of everything that's going on around the world and what that means to us in the procurement profession. So that hopefully will stimulate some thoughts, some ideas, and some things that you'd like to focus on. It is certainly an interesting time for procurement. It's certainly a fascinating time to be in the profession. We know there's a lot of change going on, a lot of focus. We've never been in such demand, but therefore, as we're in demand, we need to make sure that we really are investing in ourselves, investing in our function to really allow us to be able to support everything our organizations are looking to do. And that's why, one of the reasons why we're doing this today. So that's probably enough from me at the moment. I would like to now introduce Pauline King and Thierry Faust. They can introduce themselves, but they are our new partner now in Switzerland, PS². So maybe Pauline, over to you.
Sure, really great to be here. I think many of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm Pauline King. You can hear I'm American. I've been living in Switzerland since 1996. I speak German. And I have a background in sales as well as sourcing, and I led the indirect procurement at Syngenta for many years. And for me, when CIPS approached us with the idea of a partnership, I just thought one of the things that excited me was, as I've been involved in CIPS for a long time, is that CIPS with its practice-based approach really spoke to me. And I think this idea of building from the inside is really the only way to go, actually, when you are moving forward in procurement. And also looking at this certification and compliance work that CIPS is strong in, that actually really is what attracted me to enter into this partnership. So it's really exciting, and really looking forward to the partnership. Over to you, Thierry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Pauline. So I'm Thierry Faust. I think a lot of you know me as well. I've been part of the CIPS network in Switzerland and committee for a few years now. Yeah, and so briefly said, my background is in procurement and supply management for what, 25, 26 years now, and always in big companies in automotive and pharma. And what I really focus on is organizational and process development and excellence, because these are things that when you can keep them simple and efficient, they are really bringing a lot to the organization and to its partners. Yeah, about the partnership with CIPS, it's really a great thing. I think it's a great opportunity for the profession, because what I value in CIPS, essentially, I would say, it's by procurement and supply chain people for procurement and supply chain people. It's made by practitioners like all of us here in this session today for the good of ourselves and to serve our companies and our customers better. So that's really something I really appreciate. And as it's done by ourselves internally, it really helps a lot about ownership of the changes and the improvement we can bring, because people do that themselves. It's not just a bunch of outsiders that come and distribute things. It's you do it yourself, you improve yourself. So that's why I'm really, really excited to be able to work on that and share that with you today. Again, thank you for being there.
Pauline, Thierry, thank you. And I think good to sort of introduce where we're at and what we're trying to do within the marketplace here. But I agree with you, Thierry. I mean, there's a huge amount of improvement still needed. I mean, I have been in procurement a long time, probably more years than you have, which is unfortunate. But we've never stopped changing. We've never stopped looking for ways to improve. And there's still a lot of organisations who are still scratching the surface of the benefit they can get if they really do work more effectively with their suppliers and get more out of their supply chains. And I said, I think John's going to come on and talk in a minute with us, but the disruptions that's going on and the challenges across the piece is a real challenge for us, and I think that's something we should do. We just got a comment in from Bill that says that they can't see us, they can only see a holding screen. Stephanie, is that the case? I'm just going to double check with you because we can see each other.
I can see you, Duncan.
Okay, well, yeah, but you're one of the
our panelists.
Oh no, Trudy said she can see all of you. Okay, maybe we just got Bill has got a computer malfunction. So anyway, thanks for that, Bill. It's good to meet you again. Anyway, and also when you're putting stuff in chat, if you want to just do it more widely, please do click that to all panelists and attendees. That goes to everyone, whereas to panelists is just those of us who are here that can see that. So what I'm going to do now is move on and let's introduce Dr. John Glen, whose voice popped up a minute ago. So John has worked with CIPS for a long time now as an economist. He's a visiting fellow at the Cranfield School of Management, and he's a regular contributor to us in terms of insights and views of as an economist for what's going on. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of interesting insight from him. And as I said, if you've got questions that pop up as he's talking, please do put them in the Q&A. And then when we go to a more open panel session, then he'll have a chance to answer them then. So John, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Duncan, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for attending today. And hopefully, if I get this right, yeah. So what I want to talk to you today about is the economic disruption that we've obviously faced as a result of the pandemic and other activities that are going on in the global economy, and the impact that that's going to have on procurement now and as we go forward into the future. And again, just to the point that Duncan made, it was ever thus. This is the challenge that procurement professionals face on an ongoing basis. Sometimes I know I've annoyed one or two of your colleagues when I've sort of suggested that we face special times and special conditions, and they say, John, this is the life of a procurement professional. We have to react to the environment that we find ourselves in. We're continually reviewing our procurement processes, our procurement networks, our procurement decisions, and now we're just faced with another set of variables that we have to react to, and on the plus side, emerging set of tools that allow us to meet those challenges as effectively as we possibly can. So without any further ado, I want to start the presentation. And again, if there are any questions that you've got, please put them in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll endeavour to address as many of them as we can this afternoon. So the first thing that I thought I would do is provide you with some economic data. This is from the IMF and the most recent World Economic Outlook report of April 2021. And it's good to know that one of the first diagrams that you actually come across in that report is one that's based on data provided by CIPS and Market, and looking at the PMIs globally and the extent to which the PMIs have recovered from the downturn that we experienced at the beginning and through the pandemic into the early part of this year, which is indicating what? Is indicating that procurement professionals are now more positive, more confident about the outlook going forward. They're starting to replenish their inventory, place orders in order that our businesses and our economies are in a place to take advantage of the upswing as the upswing in economic activity occurs. So we all like to see this V shape when economists like myself talking to you when we've gone through a period of downturn and seeing that confidence, I hasten to add, is recovering robustly. Against that, we then have to take a sort of longer term perspective and look at the impact of the crisis sort of 4 years out, so 4 years out from 2020. And essentially what this diagram does, and again, it's from the World Economic Outlook that the IMF have produced most recently in April, and it's comparing the impact on output in the world, in advanced economies, in emerging economies, and in low-income countries, compared to the downturn that we faced after the financial crisis. So 4 years out after the financial crisis, the recovery in the world economy will be much more robust. Yes, output will still be below what it was in 2019, but will be recovering quite robustly. In advanced economies, we see that that recovery is almost complete. But in emerging economies and low-income economies, we see that the recovery, first of all, the impact of the pandemic is much greater in lower income countries, and also that the recovery is not as robust into 2023-24. So the picture that we're getting here is one of a mixed recovery, of a non-synchronized recovery as far as the pandemic is concerned. But also the picture that we're getting is that the impact will not be as severe as the financial crisis was. In other words, that we'll recover from the pandemic in terms of economic activity, particularly in advanced economies, much faster than we did from the financial crisis. So again, the different speeds of economic recovery is important. And again, this lack of synchronization will also have impacts for our supply chain, as those elements of our supply chain which are located in emerging economies or lower income economies are likely to see activity in those economies being disrupted for a longer period of time. And here we can see this wave of economies as they emerge from the pandemic, where many of them are still, many of the economies that are in our supply chain are still in the throes of recovering from the pandemic and dealing with the alleviation of the pandemic rather than getting back to business as usual. So the economic news is good. Confidence is restoring. In advanced economies, our recovery from the pandemic will be much swifter than it was compared to the financial crisis of 2008. But we have to be aware of this uneven pattern of the impact of the pandemic and how that might affect activity in some of the economies that we procure goods and services from in our supply chain, where the disruption might last for a lot longer. Going on then, when I'm looking at the impact on procurement and the impact on procurement of economic disruption, I want to make a differentiation here between what I would call business as usual risk and what I'd like to differentiate as systemic risk. Systemic risk I would associate with the pandemic. Systemic risk I would associate with a cyber attack, with changes in trading relationships and trade wars, and I'll talk about them a bit later in my presentation. Business as usual risk I would characterize as the latest events in the Suez Canal. The fire on the right is the fire at the computer chip factory, and the picture at the bottom is an environmental disaster, a tsunami, all of which I would characterize as business as usual risks. These are risks that we have to monitor in our supply chain and mitigate, I would say, on a daily basis. And that kind of economic disruption is something that is painful at the point that we incur it, but it's something that we can monitor, we can mitigate to some extent, and we have tools to allow us to do that. So there are tools available. There are bureaus who will monitor your supply chain for you. Some of the CIPS colleagues may have come across risk methods. Organizations like DHL have their Resilience 360 tool. Kuehne + Nagel have a Sea Explorer tool and are developing tools that allow you to monitor your supply chain, to identify risks in your supply chain, to see when those risks materialize, and to mitigate those risks on a business as usual basis. Systemic risks are a risk that we will need to manage going forward. And the key systemic risks for me are going forward now are climate change, the climate change agenda, increased protectionism, cybersecurity, and the risks or maybe potentially the mitigation opportunities that exist around big data and artificial intelligence. So as far as the economic impact of these risks is concerned, this is a piece of work that was done recently at the beginning of this year by McKinsey, where they looked at the magnitude of a particular shock that may occur in our supply chain on the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, they looked at our ability to anticipate that risk materializing. And obviously, one of the biggest risks in terms of our inability to anticipate it occurring and the magnitude of the impact that it would have if it were to occur is cyber risk. And again, in terms of the economic impact that this would have on our business, I'm going to argue that this is a risk that we have to manage, we have to be aware of, and we have to address very, very carefully in the very near future, and enhance the steps that we're taking already. We've seen that extreme pandemic perversely was much more easier to anticipate but the cost to us in terms of the impact on our business has been absolutely phenomenal. And then something that I'm going to talk to in a moment is the impact of trade disputes. Again, more predictable, but only slightly less painful in terms of the impact that has on our supply chain and on the challenge that we face as procurement professionals. So if we're looking at the impact of climate change, I would argue, and indeed the World Economic Forum argue, that we need to focus on the biggest 8 supply chains. And then I think this is where the attention is going to come, both from regulators, from government, and I would argue very, very soon from our consumer, and increasingly from our consumer. If we could mitigate the pollutive activity of 8 key supply chains that account for 50% of global CO2 emissions, then this would just add between 1% and 4% to the increased costs of our consumer, of our end consumer. So a reading that I would ask you to look at is the Net Zero Challenge from the World Economic Forum. Okay, an excellent publication, and the key things that come out of that are the big 8 that we need to look at are food, construction, FMCG, electronics, automotive, professional services, and freight. Freight being an area that I work closely with. And my contention is that I think these sectors are going to come under increased pressure from that tripartite of interest parties, our customers, our governments, and broader regulators to reduce the CO2 emissions, to address a climate agenda. And the key things that they can do is, revisit product design choices, reconsider sourcing strategies, set ambitious procurement standards, and work jointly with suppliers to co-fund abatement levers. So these are 4 of the 10 key recommendations that come out of the World Economic Forum paper that I asked you to look at, okay, or that I referred you to, that procurement people can make a contribution to directly. In terms of increased protectionism, which is something that I see potentially coming forward, my contention would be that as Western economic hegemony is challenged, so what do I mean here? As the dominance of the world economic order that has occurred for the last 50 to 70 years from North America and Western Europe is challenged predominantly by East Asia. We in Western Europe and North America have a number of choices available to us. We can innovate and leverage intellectual property to meet the challenge. We can have a race to the bottom in terms of deregulating, or we can protect. Okay, and what I'm afraid of is that our economies, rather than doing the thing where our competitive advantage exists, which is innovating and leveraging intellectual property, are more likely to deregulate, okay, and are more likely to protect our industries in an attempt to meet this economic challenge. But the fortunate thing for us, and the real impact for us as procurement professionals, is that if the protection option is taken, or if the protection option increases in terms of its attractiveness, any increase in protectionism is going to lead to a reconfiguration of our supply chain relationships. It's going to force us to reconfigure those relationships. So what's the issue here? Different sectors are going to have different exposures. Aerospace and semiconductors, for example, are susceptible to cyber attacks. because they've got high levels of digitalization, R&D, capital intensity, and exposure to digital data flows. But there are cybersecurity tools and systems that are in place. What I'm suggesting, what I'm imploring us to do is to avail ourselves of those. I think those systems are relatively unsophisticated, but I think those systems will help us. As far as artificial intelligence and big data is concerned, I think that it is going to be an increasing element of how we deal with disruption. It is going to be an increasing element of how we deal with our business as usual. I think that we are at the start of a journey of using artificial intelligence and big data, and hence my diagram. Some of you may have heard me say this before. As far as artificial intelligence and big data is concerned, inside procurement, I think we are closer to 1987 and a mobile telephone of a 1987 than we are of the Apple iPhone 12, which is what we've got today. Now, it took the telecoms industry the best part of 35 years to get from the mobile telephone on the left to the Apple telephone on the right. I think in terms of AI and big data in procurement, we're closer to 1987, but we're going to get to the equivalent of the Apple iPhone a lot quicker than telecoms did. So AI and big data are going to be an increasing part of our procurement reality. They're going to be an increasing part of how we meet the risks in our supply chain. They're going to be an increasing part of how we deal with disruption, and they're going to be an increasing part of how we mitigate the economic costs that are associated with disruption. One last point that I would like to make then is that if a digital agenda, if a big data agenda, if cybersecurity is going to be a big part of our world going forward, then I'm slightly worried about legacy IT systems and our dependence upon legacy IT systems inside our organization. Many of our organizations lament the fact that their IT systems are heavily legacy based, if not quite green screen, then dependent upon legacy systems that are not too far from green screens. We have to make the move from legacy systems to new systems if we're going to address a digital agenda, meet the risks that are existing in our supply chain, and counteract the risk of cybersecurity attacks, so meet the challenges that we face going forward. And we're going to have to do all of this transformation and perform as a procurement function at the same time. So the economic disruption that we potentially face from exceptional events such as the pandemic is providing the procurement profession with challenges that have been extreme, okay, and that frankly we have met and deserve to congratulate ourselves with the extent to which we have met those challenges. And contrary to what this might seem, this is not an attempt to advertise yet another CIPS event, but there is one on the Salary Guide and Insights 2021. I think it's on May the 26th, so there's the plug. But the reason that I've put this up is across the globe, and this survey has been carried out literally across the globe. One of the key statistics that comes out of that piece of work, that piece of research, is that the procurement function inside organizations is now more visible, and the contribution that procurement is making to the organization is now deemed to be critical by board members and senior managers outside the procurement function inside our organizations. So the pandemic has shown the contribution that procurement can make. the pandemic has shown the contribution that procurement can make to mitigating that economic disruption. But now what we can show as procurement professionals is how we can meet the business as usual risks, monitor those risks and mitigate those risks going forward, but also how we can react to the systemic disruption that we're going to see in our environment and mitigate the risks that those systemic challenges pose to our organizations, and be part of developing the strategy and sustaining our organizations and the generation of economic value going forward. So thank you for attention. I'm now going to return to Duncan and look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Duncan, over to you.
I think it's actually over to Pauline, but we can't hear.
Pauline, sorry. Pauline, over to you.
Pauline, you're on mute.
Pauline, you're on mute.
Oh, you hear me now?
We can.
Yes, we do.
Okay, yes. All righty. So thanks, John. That was super interesting. Actually brings to mind another recent presentation that we did with Gartner, looking at technology and how actually most of the investment in technology right now is on the basics. So that would absolutely be in a line on that. But I'd just like to pick up a question that we have in the Q&A. It's coming from John Everett. He says he's surprised to see the UK recovery is behind Germany and Italy, considering that the UK was way ahead on vaccinations. Do you have any comment on that? Is it Brexit plus COVID?
I think John's answered his own question. I mean, I have to give a health warning here, as I always do. I am a dyed-in-the-wool Ramona, okay? I want to remain, and I moan about it all the time. So, look, John, we have to get over the fact that we have left the European Union, but it is undoubtedly a part of the impact that you're seeing. So the fact that we vaccinated should help us open our economy up and get economic activity back. As somebody who drove from Manchester to Birmingham yesterday, if the amount of traffic on the motorway is a proxy for economic activity, our economy is opening up again. The motorway was exceptionally busy, but Brexit is undoubtedly a brake on our recovery, and it's not what this call is about. So I'm going to stop my comment there, or else I'll go on forever.
Excellent. Look, I'd like to ask the rest of the panel to join before going to the next questions. Róisín, Duncan, Thierry, can you come online? Excellent, great. Well, I'd just like to give, Róisín, you're on mute, I can see. So before we get into some more questions, just like to give Róisín a couple of minutes to introduce herself. And thank you so much for being here. It's great you agreed. Over to you, Róisín.
Thanks, I'll keep it very brief. My name is Róisín Daetz. I work for Sony Europe, working in indirect procurement. And for the past 3.5 years, I've been responsible for procurement, all procurement topics in the DACH region. I'll keep it as short as that, if that's okay.
Excellent. I'm just going to take another question from the audience, and I guess this is to you, John, saying how to tackle these new and emerging disruptions that he actually had never thought of before. So that's a very broad question, but maybe a couple more comments on addressing it.
Yeah, well, how to tackle is a big question. But what I think organizations have to be aware of is that these risks are going to emerge. So, for example, if you go back to November 2019, I have to get the year right, and you could have attended a webinar by me, and it was about risks in the supply chain. And I put up the World Economic Forum report, and I say, here are the top 10 risks. and in that we have pandemic. Yeah, and everybody goes, yeah, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, thanks very much, John. Nice, interesting presentation. Now, I'm not saying that I predicted a pandemic or anything like that, because I did exactly the same. You know, I've listed them all, and yeah, we know. But now, guys, we really have got to start thinking about what are these key risks. And so for me, I think the reason I put environment on there is you know, I'm 58 years old. I'm not a, you know, a tree hugging environmentalist, hippie loving, whatever. But I just think that given the impact that the pandemic had, and given where we are as far as evidence about environmental degradation and climate change and environmental, you know, events, there's no vaccine if we get the environment wrong. And I actually think that our consumers, our governments, our electorate are starting to worry about these things. And so as procurement people, we have to think that is going to present to our businesses very, very soon. We are going to have to show that we are addressing these issues, not because of some greenwash agenda, but because if we don't, we will lose consumer favor. Yeah. And so I think that's front and center. I think cyber attacks, we've seen the recent attack on the oil pipeline in North America that closed down the East Coast supply for what, 4 or 5 days? You know, we know that many of our organizations continually employ organizations to attack their IT infrastructure. Yeah. So we have to manage and mitigate these risks because, you know, that's what they are. The exact DACH that we're going to take, you know, that's the stuff of, you know, 3-week seminars. You know, that's a seminar on each risk. Okay.
Maybe if I can just come in there as well, Pauline. I think one of the interesting things there is how do you motivate, incentivize people to focus on risk versus the traditional procurement approach of focusing on cost or value. And I think when we're talking to procurement organizations and working with them, that is part of the challenge here. It is front and center, John. I agree with you. It is a really important focus for us. We need to step up and really take ownership, but then we also need to make sure that our organizations recognize when we make improvements, and that you know, it's like that whole model of procurement has changed. I was in in the UK, they've just launched literally today a call for, you know, views on cybersecurity across the supply chain. It's just come out from the you know, digital minister. But the roundtable they had last week on it was really interesting, because all the people on the roundtable, about 30 odd organisations in there, including me, were all thinking about the things they'd like to do as against the things they've done. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming into. John's points, there's a lot there. We know there's a lot to do, but it's how do we then get on and start to make those steps, to start to put those, invest in those changes we need to make the impacts that we need to make on our supply chains. That's why I think a lot of procurement organisations at the moment are, and that's part of our challenge looking into the next 2 to 3 years as to what we do and how we do it and how we organise ourselves to really go and focus on the right things and really do proper long-term strategic procurement.
Can I just add one very quick point to that? I think, just as a non-expert in anything related to any of this, but from what I understand, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, pandemic, environment, you know, all of these risks, they are somehow connected to each other. So mitigating certain risks, maybe besides the cyber attacks, although, you know, maybe it is in another way connected, but if you start to mitigate environmental risks by way of your supply chain, the logic would be you reduce the risk of future pandemics, because it is connected to the erosion of certain environments across the world, and the I suppose resulting reliance on bushmeat or different diseases coming out of different areas, which creates these global pandemics that we can no longer control. I guess would be my contribution to that. I mean, it's all connected.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think that we have to see those connections, and that we have to understand our role, and we have to be much more strategic, as Duncan was saying. And then the only other thing that I would say is, as a procurement professional, if we're interacting with government, it's interesting, you said it came out of government, that both organizations like CIPS and then individual businesses have to lobby government ministers, have to get involved in that policy discussion. And I warn you now, it is the most soul destroying activity that you will ever get involved in. You know, you will turn up to meet government ministers, they will not turn up, they will send junior people, they will disrespect you. But if you want to get anything done, you have to keep going back. Sorry if I've been a bit, those remarks are mine solely, and are not necessarily the remarks that are associated with the organization that I'm speaking on behalf of today. Did I get that bit right, Róisín?
I'll be disclaiming in a similar fashion later.
Yeah.
But Róisín, I mean, just picking up on how do you face these challenges? We were speaking before of, you know, what did Sony Europe do? Because you all had an abrupt situation last year, and the way you described it to me, it sounded pretty intense. But would be curious to know what actually changed as in response, but what didn't change? So and got under the cover, you know, swept on the side.
I think the challenges that Sony faced, especially in around March to May last year, were not entirely indifferent to, or undifferent, or different to the challenges that most organizations faced, except for the fact that, like many companies, we're in consumer electronics. Therefore, when the shops shut, business kind of dries up. So I think the biggest challenge for us at the time was reacting incredibly quickly to situations that were changing on an hourly, a daily basis. And I guess trying to work within the confines of the processes and systems that we have in place in real time, which is very challenging for procurement, because we are very process driven. We're very approvals based. Obviously, we have our risk mitigation processes in place. We have governance in place. And how do you manage that when you're facing the prospect of income drying up tomorrow, and you have suppliers that need the cash that they will get from you and from their other electronics customers or other retail customers? And, you know, that was a really, really huge challenge. And also, I'm guessing most people, if we think back to March and April of last year, switching from one day to the next to working from home and having an infrastructure that was not built for everyone to be using VPN at the same time, all of a sudden. So, you know, managing those risks at the same time as this kind of infrastructural challenge was, yeah, intense is a good word for it. I probably have some more spicy words for it, to be honest, but intense is a good one. What changed, I think, I mean, what was good, we had just gone through the PEP, so we'd gone through the CIPS process. I think we've actually finished up maybe in March of last year. I can't remember exactly, but what was good was we had a better understanding of our foundations, of the data that we had in place, that our processes were quite robust, which helped us a lot when it came to the challenges that we faced. I think BCPs, business continuity plans, became a lot less theoretical and a lot less what is in there, who looked at this, who really thought about what could happen, and are those kind of plans actually in place, and has anyone stress tested them? And I think that's something that we all need to probably take a closer look at. We started looking at things instead of on an annual basis with suppliers, it became a weekly basis. It became then a monthly basis, and I've been out on maternity leave for the past 6 months, but I'm assuming when I go back, it's probably fallen into a quarterly rhythm or something like that. Because liquidity, obviously, for some of our suppliers became a massive topic overnight, literally from one day to the next. How do you plan for that? It's not planning at that stage, it's how do you react to that? But I think our processes stayed the same, which was helpful. So it kind of, I guess, proved that what we had in place was robust enough to deal with the issues to hand. That was a very long-winded way of replying, so I hope it answered the question.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I think it's, you know, it's also how you respond. So it's all very well to have things on paper, but then what happens in real time is when you really see if it's robust. John, there's another question from you from the audience around how do you see the link with the pandemic and the move for bringing supply chains nearer to home and sort of this protectionist policies, and how do you see that playing out? There was an event yesterday as well that kind of got into this topic of protectionism and bringing things closer to home, and whether that's really doable or not doable. I'm not sure if that was a clear question.
Yeah, I just think that, look, you know, protectionism just causes another element to come into the procurement professionals' decision-making process. So again, you know, yeah, we have to deal with it, and then we make a decision on that basis. And then I think, Pauline, the point that you're alluding to is this notion of, yeah, people talk about onshoring, reshoring. So for example, you know, Brexit will onshore the activity that we can't get from the European Union, or it's difficult to get. Well, that assumes that the capability and the capacity exists there to onshore that activity. And that's not always the case. You know, if you've hollowed out supply chains domestically and, you know, you've procured globally, then the assumption that that capacity can, you know, rise like a phoenix from the ashes, you know, yeah. That's the basic issue that you've got. So yes, there will be a reconfiguration. There may be nearshoring, you know, so your supply chain may get shorter, okay? But again, that just reflects the geographic realities of the protectionism.
Yeah.
I think maybe to come in and probably build on Róisín's point as well about a lot of these things are linked. You know, the sustainability agenda linked to you know, the need to have more transparency and visibility of your supply chain. I think that most of the procurement organisations that we are working with and talking to are saying exactly the same. That, you know, they didn't understand their supply chain. They didn't know where stuff was coming from. They didn't know how exposed they were, not just to the pandemic, but to all those other issues that happened down your supply chain anyway. And I think going back to doing procurement properly, really looking at your sourcing strategy, really looking at the options you've got, looking at mitigating factors to give you that flexibility you're looking for, but also taking into account all the requirements you've got to match. I do think there will be a lot more nearshoring or local sourcing. But it was interesting you mentioned the chip shortage, John. I mean, that's great, but are you actually going to have a chip manufacturer, you know, of the size and scale that you get in Taiwan or they're building in Texas? No. I mean, that's not going to happen on that scale. So even there, you're still going to be exposed to that global market in a way, because that investment is just not going to happen in the way that maybe we'd like it to.
Yeah. There's another interesting question from the audience that goes in that direction. And this is looking at supplier pre-qualification. And this is another layer of supplier management and sort of managing your risk and risk mitigation. Thierry, I know this is one of your favorite topics. It's sort of your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And looking at that, maybe you want to talk about that pre-qualification and perhaps also looking at your suppliers over time and making sure you're mitigating that.
No, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I swear I didn't ask for this question, but it's really great. It's really a topic I love because it's how to make sure that first you select the right people to work with. And when I say people, it's companies, but also the people within the company. And I think that's very, very important. So you have a screening process that needs to be done, and that's really important there. However, it's not the only thing. You also need to have a control and a performance measurement of what's happening. Because otherwise, it's not because you're in one day that you have to stay in for whatever number of decades without making sure that what you do is measured. And I've been working recently with a company that they have a very robust, and they spend a lot of money to qualify their suppliers. You know, within the discussions, they spend about $10,000 to qualify every single supplier in terms of internal efforts plus, visits, audits, everything. So that's a huge investment. And then comes all the qualification of the products themselves. So they really spend a lot of money, and still they have problems. And they have problems mostly because they somehow don't monitor what's happening well enough, And that's a part of performance and relationship management that's often forgotten. And most of the way you look at it in the conversation I had with this company was essentially the procurement and supply chain people. I think that's what you were saying as well, Duncan, is they are measured on savings. They are not measured on risk mitigation, on 0-day stoppage of production lines. So that's not what they focus on. I remember in my times in the automotive industry, the one thing you would never ever do in your life was to stop the line. I mean, stopping a customer line, you were out. It was as simple as this. I remember flying parts across Europe in choppers, not to stop the line, because it's not only it's big impact on the manufacturing, but also it's a crazy cost. So coming back to supplier pre-qualification, that's important, but monitoring on a daily basis what's happening and being able to communicate, not what's happening now, because when you control and monitor, you look at now and the past, but communicating on what's coming, that's the most important. And I'm sorry, I have a long answer there, but I want to give another example, still from the automotive.
Maybe, that actually brings what you said, Róisín. It sounds like you guys shifted to more forward and faster looking at what was happening with suppliers. Did I get that right?
I mean, by the definition of how things went last year, you kind of had to. I mean, things stopped. The shops closed. So you just have to react, on a hairpin and become a little bit more, proactive in how you approach those kind of problems. And I think there was a comment from the Q&A as well, that these things are a once in a century event. I don't think they are. A pandemic is not a once in a century event anymore. We've already had 3, I think. It's just that this one was more widely felt, was more global, but these are not, at least in my understanding, they're not isolated events, and they will become more frequent, and you have to future-proof yourself against that, whether you're in indirect procurement or direct procurement. You have to start looking at how you react to things faster, and how that works in tandem with your procurement processes and governance.
Right. Great. Thanks for picking up that question, because I thought I was going to put that in as a last question as we were coming up. The question was around, how do you deal with your CFO who says, well, this is a once in a lifetime, so what? So everyone's having it, so it's not really worth looking at. I think that's a difficult one to address.
I think to support Róisín there, yes, pandemics are not once in a lifetime, but also if you go back 10, 15 years ago, that's what we used to say about environmental events. Oh, that's a once in 100, but we've had 5 once in 100 year, floods in the last 10 years. So kind of, your probability is under a bit of pressure. And frankly, it's a typical CFO response. You wouldn't expect
a CPO would never say that, though, obviously.
I couldn't possibly comment, but more than happy to comment on a CFO.
Excellent. Just looking through here. I think we would have time for one. Let's take a last question from Bill. He always has good questions. It says, discussions tend to be about protecting the status quo and reacting. Who was talking to the CEO and proposing ways in which you can be more competitive as a basis for more competitive and future prosperity? So the future thing. You touched on that a bit, John, but so maybe to cloak, we'll take that as a last impulse from the audience. So less reactive and more proactive. How can we get there?
To me, well, I think the whole environmental not John. I'd say the whole environment. The whole environmental agenda is about being proactive. You know, the whole use of AI and big data is about being proactive, about being forward-looking. And Thierry said it, and Róisín said it. You know that if you get this right, then it allows you to predict what's coming and to be more competitive and to address your customers' needs and to protect the supply chain and to have goods and services, you know, at your customers when and as they need them.
Great. Okay, thanks so much for so many great questions. I'm going to hand back over to Duncan to wrap it up. We're almost out of time, so we're going to end promptly. Over to you, Duncan.
Thank you, Pauline. And maybe just to build on what John said there, I think procurement leaders, as a leader of a procurement organization, your job is to go to the executive and to talk about the future and not just talk about your commodity charts and the problems you've had in the past. That is a mindset shift. That is a shift to being more of a strategic leader in your business. And any of us who've been to board meetings, we know that that is a very different environment to operate in. You've got to build your skill set up to be a much more business person, to go and have those business discussions. I think that really came through strongly from all the questions we've had from people today, and from the general sense that John was giving us. I mean, you know, he shares these information with us. Do we actually go read it? Do we go and get that report and download it and look at it and build up our own skill set? Often we don't. I think what we're all hearing from today is that we've got to be much more in tune with what's going on in our business, in tune with the economic environment, in tune with the challenges that's going on. Get those skill sets up, get the procurement function working well, and then you'll be able to have those more strategic executive discussions in the way that you'd like to as a leader of a function. So excellent conversation. We are short of time. So really, just apart from saying thank you very much to Pauline and Thierry for coming on board as a CIPS partner. We're delighted to be working with you now, so that'd be great. As usual, thank you to John for an excellent insight and presentation and questions. And thank you to Róisín for coming in and joining us and giving us the perspective from Sony Europe as well. We hope you found this interesting. There's quite a few links that's going through in terms of follow-ups for you to have. But obviously, if there is anything else, please do contact any of us. We'll be very happy to pick up the conversation with you. But particularly in Switzerland, focus your discussions with Pauline and Thierry. Thank you very much for today. I hope you found it useful, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.